So it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? Hello everybody, it's I, Flamingo Writer here, and I do apologize in advance if this video took a lot longer, but honestly it had to do with a lot of things that happened this month. A lot of things happened along the way. First there was the Wi-Fi issues, then there was also the fact that I got sick. I had some drama that I did not want to get myself part of because some two people wanted me to get part of it, and I don't want to talk about who those two are in particular. And then there's also the fact that I had too much on my mind as is, especially when it comes to real life. But nonetheless, we're still here. It's still Arina Tanemura month, and none that has to do with any of the video we're going to be talking about today. So, I guess with that said, however, let's go back to the previous episode before the I feel defeated video. So let's take a cue recap. When we last left off our Magical Girl podcast, I talked about a series known as Phantom Thief Jean. Undoubtedly a series that, while I don't consider it the worst out there like some people do, I still consider it a flawed series, but I still enjoy it nonetheless, as if it regardless of that anyways. Though while my video doesn't sound like it, I will admit that it was basically a loose adaptation. But keep in mind, just because I personally find it a flawed series does not mean that I find it the worst out there. If you've been following me for a while, then you already know that. But none of that has to do with the series we're looking at today. However, I might as well say that I must be a complete idiot because when you get right down to it, there's a reason why I myself didn't talk about it in my last video. But I did say you should grab yourself a full box of tissues. But looking back at it, I wouldn't call it the most depressing series out there, but it is something that you might want to caution yourself when checking it out. That series being Full Moon o Sagashite, or Full Moon, or Searching for the Full Moon, whatever title you go by, it's still that, but we're going to call it Full Moon for sure. Full Moon is another Arina Tanemura series, and honestly, it's the last one we'll be covering anyways, because, well, I'll get to that at the end of the video, but it's clear to me that while I will admit that this is one case where, unlike Phantom Thief Jean, where I actually did want to take a look at it, this one is one that I really wanted to push back on, and it's not for the reasons you may assume. It's not, it's like say it's the worst series that made me push it away. It's really one of those series that, in retrospect, you have to be ready for, and you're about to see why that is. However, there were some things that kind of made me push it off for a little bit of reasons as is, but honestly, the series itself did seem to have a lot of things working with it and against it, if you know what I'm saying. While the anime itself is not really say it's the worst out there, I hear a lot of people say it's stronger than Phantom Thief Jean, and others say that it was a loose adaptation again, but I wouldn't know either way. However, Full Moon does have some things that do seem to be working with it anyways, so let's talk about one of the biggest things I need to address. First off, for those who are going to be curious, yeah, unlike Phantom Thief Jean, Full Moon actually did get an English dub. Sort of. Yeah, the series itself did get an English dub, but it never really got fully dubbed. It only got partially dubbed, only for about 20 plus episodes. Meanwhile, the anime itself was 52 episodes. And before you ask, no, I couldn't get that much information who dubbed who because Wikipedia doesn't seem to bother anyways. Whether it's because the actors are anonymous or maybe it was done amateurishly, I wouldn't know. But some people did say they grew up with this year's series, and I'm all for it when it gets right down to it. And the anime was animated by Studio Dean, who I talked about before, but I don't really want to talk about too much on Studio Dean's works because the only series I've talked about so far on my channel was Hellgirl. I do know other stuff that came from the studio, don't get me wrong, but if I had to list everything I knew the studio from, we'd be here all day. So I'm just gonna leave that for you to see it for yourself. But I'm kind of surprised that this year's series actually managed to be animated by a different studio because, well, I know that some adaptations will be adapted by other studios, like say from someone like Naoki Asara or some like someone from two different studios before they stayed for Madhouse. But even with that said, however, I still find that pretty rare, from Toei Animation to Studio Dean, though the latter of which it's up to you. But let's talk about Full Moon and see if we can search for what we're searching for. Our series begins with our main character, Mitsuki, a 12-year-old girl who loves music, so much so that she promises to meet the boy of her dreams, Ichikun, that she made a promise to when they were both younger, before the start of the series began, and she wants to become a singer. However, it's interrupted that Mitsuki kind of has a problem. See, she can't sing. And before you ask, no, it's not because her tonsils are removed or she has a sore throat or something. No. If you've heard of the series or never heard of it before now, then your guess is probably something else. Yeah, she has throat cancer, so much so that it prevents her from singing, and her grandmother prevents her from singing, as well as having any kind of music into her. Mitsuki doesn't like this, especially because of what's about to happen. However, two Shinigami by name of Mariko, the pink bunny Shinigami, and Toko, though the cat Shinigami, both appeared right in front of her. But they're surprised that she's able to see them because guess what? No other human could ever see them. This is mostly due to the fact that they're really death gods, so they can't really be seen by any other human. But unfortunately, they tell Mitsuki the bad news. She only has 1 year left to live. I'm not gonna lie, that's kind of a scary thing in of itself when you think about it. So Mitsuki, he's so much so, doesn't know how to react to these two and the hands of Mariko and Mitsuki, so much so she decides to run off. Reluctant at first, though, when Mitsuki goes there to audition, even though the Shinigami decided to turn her into a 16-year-old girl in the process, it's here where we see that she's kind of reluctant, considering that her vocal cords don't work as good as they are. But after a few tweaks here and there, yeah, the Shinigami actually made her voice sound a little better than it did before. And once you know it, after the audition, she won, and as she becomes the idol, only to find out that's not all it's cracked up to be. So what we got here is a young 12-year-old girl who wants to become a singer. She has throat cancer when going so already. And it goes without saying that even with that said, she goes so far as to do whatever she can to become a singer, only to find out that's not all like that. So you're probably thinking what it is. It's both a magical girl and an idol series. And I find it kind of funny how when I got a sore throat, I started watching this year's series while also watching The Hero of Tomorrow talk about his own aspects of his own experiences when it comes to Idol and Magical Girl, considering he's not a fan of it. But I'm not going to hold a grudge against people who aren't into something like that. If you're someone who is not into Magical Girl, Idol, or possibly the combination of the two, then chances are this series is probably not going to change your mind either way, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One thing I will say about Full Moon that I do enjoy, however, is how much a lot of people seem to think that this is stronger than Phantom Thieves'. And in my personal opinion, I can kind of see why that is. I mean, the manga itself was actually made years after Phantom Thieves' ended, or somewhere in those between. But even with that said, I still think they did pretty well for itself. But this isn't the first time I've talked about a Magical Girl and Idols series combined together. The first time I ever talked about it was from the series Mermaid Melody. But whereas Mermaid Melody actually has a little more leeway with its own characters, as well as having a lot more episodes and having conflict with bad guys, Full Moon is not anything like that. Yeah, there are characters who will get misunderstood from time to time, but Mermaid Melody actually had a majority of songs. Now, say what you want about Mermaid Melody and how much they repeat the same songs until they get upgraded or something. I really don't know what you call it when Idol gets upgraded in some cases, because Full Moon doesn't do all of that all the time. But I think with Mermaid Melody, you can say that there are bad guys, so it can keep it entertaining for some people. But the difference there is that with Full Moon, there is no bad guy. There are no bad guys here and there, while characters do get misunderstood half the time. It's really more like, say, it's really story-driven, and the characters do develop over time, even though some of them could use a bit more answers than they are when they're vague in the anime. So that's really take your pick if you guessed it. Which in some cases, I can kind of see why some people wouldn't like Full Moon as much if there's no bad guy. But like I said in my Secret of Nim video, I said before that you don't have to have a conflict just because there's no overarching bad guy, and it can have something to do with that. I think the conflict itself, when it comes to both the throat cancer and the industry of music as a whole, then I think you can at least say you don't have to have an overarching bad guy. Hell, this isn't the first time that we've seen a Magical Idol series do this. Fancy Lala has this, and while I haven't seen the series myself yet, I know that the Hero of Tomorrow talked about it, and I want to get into it myself, considering duh. But I think that's really the thing when it comes right down to it. Now, I hear some people say that the bad guys are what keep the series from going, but I don't always agree with that sentiment anyways. It's because, let's be real here, why would you want a bad guy all the time in your series anyways? And you might well say it's an idol series, maybe there's some competition. Yeah, there are some times where the characters can be a bit much at times, but I won't lie, I think that's really what it is. Sometimes it really depends on what you mean by that. Though, admittedly, if you're not into someone who's not into character motives that aren't persuaded by bad guys, then I'm pretty sure that, like I said before, you're not going to enjoy the series as much. And unfortunately, that's kind of the downside when it comes to that. But I don't want to say Full Moon is a bad series necessarily. It has its flaws, sure, but I don't think the overarching and stuff has to do with it in any ways. No, the problem with some people have with its series is its pacing. Remember when I said this had 52 episodes? Well, unlike Phantom Thief Jean, and yes, I do compare that series to this, not just because they're written by the same person, but it's also due to the fact about how much people seem to have the notion where they take one over the other. But if you've been on my channel, spoiler, you already know the answer. But if you know what I'm going to say for sure, then you already know what my answer is. But let's pretend we don't. I think the real thing about Phantom Thief Jean is that at least when it comes to that series in itself, you can at least say there's a bad guy here and there. Okay, I do apologize if the pictures are very small, usually, compared to the big ones I have every now and then, but that's because these images are getting smaller than they are, and they're mostly screenshots from recordings. You can tell from the timestamp right there from the corner left if you haven't seen this already. I do apologize for that, but while this did have a DVD release, I couldn't really get much to it anyways. Plus, I don't have a DVD player, so I couldn't do that either, but let's move on. Anyways, what I'm trying to say here is that Full Moon is not like any other Magical Girl show I've covered. At least I don't think they have. The most conflict you're going to get is basically between real people and their own struggles between both the music and the industry in of itself. That doesn't mean they're necessarily bad guys, they're just doing whatever they can. I understand some people aren't going to like conflicts between real people, but I think Full Moon actually did that pretty well of itself. Though some people in Reddit seem to rant about how much they said it's infuriating, we don't get much into that. And I can kind of see why they say that, because the first season is basically Mitsuki doing all she can to become an idol. It's basically as standard as you can get. She's becoming a singer? Check. She's becoming the person that she wants to become a singer while still avoiding her grandmother for finding out? Check. And she realizes that there are some questions that have more raised than ever before. Again, keep in mind, Mitsuki is 12 years old and she gets transformed into a 16-year-old. You know, if every time I see a magical girl get turned into an idol, I start noticing that their hair color always changes from then on out. I guess that's one way to change your identity, but why have the same hair color anyways? Though admittedly, Dora Maney did talk about this series, and I didn't watch that video entirely, mostly because I didn't want to spoil myself, but I figured I might as well tell you guys with that anyway. But when I say that the series itself is filled with the first half of it being your standard idol series, I meant that. See, the first season, or in this case, the first half of the series, because they say that it's a full season, but I'm just going to call it 2 seasons so you can understand where I'm going with this. Anyways, the first season, which has 26 episodes, has a lot to do with Mitsuki wanting to become an idol. Now, whether that appeals to you or not is completely subjective, but I think that's kind of why some people probably thought it was really forgettable. Personally, I never found it forgettable. Yeah, it's basically what you'd expect from an idol series, going through what the industry does in some cases, but I think they're trying to illustrate it's not always what it's supposed to be. I mean, being an idol, while I admit that I don't know what's it like because, well, obviously I'm not a singer, but I know that for a fact that some people are just gonna see that they're not gonna show some sugarcoating anyways, unless they're doing something that's not based on the manga, but again, I wouldn't know anyways. But the second half of the series, I will admit, they do something a little more. Mitsuki trying to find out that she's still traveling, trying to get to Ichikun, and the gods do whatever they can in order to make sure that she has everything going for it. I realize that some people are not going to enjoy this video as much as they have, but really, there's a lot to unpack in this package, so I guess we can start off by talking about the characters before we get any further. Mitsuki is your average girl that starts off what you expect. Very simple and so naive about the music industry she is herself, and she turns into an alter ego in the process. You know, some people always say that the idols always turn out to be bland and they never turn out that interesting, but I don't think that's the same thing about Mitsuki. Unlike, say, Lucia from Mermaid Melody, I think I kind of like Mitsuki's character a little more than I thought it would have, especially because Mitsuki herself actually has a little more character into her, well, character. Because let's be real here, she does have some kind of illness, and while on occasion they do bring up the fact that he has to go easy on her throat, especially with her grandmother, who, while on the surface, you could say that it's basically trying all over again from Arrow's beginning. I think it really goes without saying they actually have a better reason for this, because let's be real here. I'm not someone to judge what's it like to go through throat cancer. A sore throat, maybe, but that's not the same thing as throat cancer. Throat cancer or sarcoma is a lot worse, and since I'm not a medical expert, I'm not gonna go into detail what I thought about that anyways. One thing I will say about Mitsuki's character, however, is that she's very determined to do whatever she can to become a singer, and you can really tell just by judging that. She gets questions that are asked that are not as easy as they sound, but I think that's really the point though. She's just not really familiar with that. Then there we also have the Shinigami, Mariko, the one that has that looks like a bunny, and there's also Takudo. At first glance, you don't think much of them because, well, as mascot characters go, they're just kind of there. But as time goes on, you do get the sense of urge that they have a little more to it than just that. Mariko especially, despite having her own ditziness here and there, especially because she can be a bit way off at times, she does seem to care about Mitsuki than you may have realized. I don't know if it's just me when watching this, but does anyone almost felt like the Fairly Odd Parents in some cases, where they have these here characters trying to do whatever they can to help the child character out? Maybe a little less mean-spirited, but still. But I think that really a combination of what Mariko has to do, because while she is a Shinigami, it's also worth revealing that she seems to be more experienced than Takudo is in some cases. I'm not so sure how old these here gods are supposed to be. From what I can tell, they say they're supposed to be around 16 years old when they're around death, but honestly, what gets to me about Mariko's character is that she has a little more experience about Shinigami than Takudo does, and that's not to say Takudo is dumb. It's mostly because back in his own backstory, we do get a little more in depth about why he is not familiar with this, and he also likes Mariko in some cases. Okay, I'm just gonna say this right here and now, so let me just take a time out for just a second. While I admit I do enjoy Takudo's character, even I'll admit I'm not so sure how many people would at least say what the age consent was. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not so sure how old these here characters are supposed to be, even when it comes to being a god, even or Shinigami, because get this, 12 and 16, whether that's a legal age consent or not in Japan, your guess is as good as mine. I'm just gonna find it kind of creepy. But still, a high school student and a young elementary school student going on to middle school is not something I want to get touched on, even if it was something like that. Though, admittedly, I do like Takudo, and if I had to pick a favorite Shinigami, I think I'd prefer him in some cases. He's basically a male tsundere in some cases. What is it with feisty male cat characters in anime and shoujo always being the feisty ones? Is that why I like cat boys sometimes? Anyways, yeah, Takudo is, well, is what you get. Very feisty, very male tsundere-like, and kind of like Kyo, he does seem like he doesn't have much into him until you start seeing more about him. In the manga, his character does seem a little more easy to connect with, but I don't really mind it in the anime too much, unless he starts saying he likes him or Mitsuki in some cases, though I kind of feel pretty bad that we never get to Mariko to be with anyone after that, because, well, spoiler alert, it doesn't mean it's a bad ending, but it's still an ending that we still get to go through. But I think that's enough what I have to say about the two Shinigami until there's another Shinigami comes out later on, but I'll get to him when we get to him. But there's also Ichi-kun, and yeah, Mitsuki seems to fuss over Ichi-kun a lot in this series. So much so that she keeps wondering if Ichi-kun will ever see her during the concert and such like that. Takudo himself doesn't like Ichi-kun, despite the fact they've never met each other, but I guess that's what happens when you have tsunderes. You know, call me wrong, correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, but I need to ask. Do I feel pretty bad like male tsunderes over female tsunderes a little more? I don't have a crush on them, I just like them. Like say, oh, I wish they were someone I could stick around with to be friends. Just saying. But yeah, Ichi-kun doesn't really have that much to say about personality-wise. I mean, sure, at times goes on before he goes in and moves away because he says he's gonna go to America. He tells Mitsuki that well, they can keep their promises, and later on just forget about him anyways. Yeah, later on in the series, we do get, that's in the second season, that's they're going to go to America, even though it looks like they're going to some place that's cold, take your pick. But yeah, apparently this is where we get to see that Ichi-kun may be in America, and Mitsuki wants to go ahead and meet the kid. Except when they do, well, I'll save that when we get to it later. I guess for right now, you can just say that Ichi-kun doesn't have that much character beyond, oh, I'm hoping to see you one day, or something along the lines of, I'm gonna like you, or something like that. Yeah, it seems like I'm going off script, but really it's hard to describe Ichi-kun. In the manga, they do explain this character a little more, even if it is still flashbacks here and there. But needless to say, that's really what you may expect from something that's a loose adaptation. Not as loose as the previous series, however, but you get one. But we do get to see some rival character by the name of Madoka, or Madoka. You know, I'm not gonna say who, but just bear with me. Anyways, Madoka here, the one with the purple or reddish hair. I'm just gonna say faded auburn, fight me. Anyways, yeah, apparently this here character actually has a little more to her than just that. Now, at first glance, you may not think of her too much because at first glance, you would think that she would just be your typical rival character. You know, the kind who wants to beat the protagonist in every sort of way so she can sabotage them in some cases. In a lot of ways, you could argue that she is what she seems to be. And yeah, I'm just gonna come out and say it. At first glance, I wanted to say that she was too much of a bitch to deal with, but as time goes on, I actually kind of like her. Hear me out, because this does go someplace. Like I said, she does start off what you expect, a rival character who's just trying to get to become an idol. But as time goes on, you start to ask yourself, why doesn't she change anytime soon? And as time goes on, after Mitsuki in her original form, not her full moon form, actually goes ahead and persuades her into saying that she shouldn't give up on her passion for music, it's here where we see a little more character development as time goes on. It's not often you see bitchy rivals actually get better as time goes on. Most people would just say they're just a rival and nothing more, and that's all there is to the character. But honestly, when it comes to Madoka, she actually does seem to have a little goal in mind, and while she is into her ways of persuading herself into becoming an idol, she still manages to go as time goes on. It's after that moment where you start to realize that that there's more to it than you may have realized. Now, it doesn't come in until, say, near the end of the first season or so, but I really do like the character development that they give to her. It's not often you see rivals actually develop a lot, but I'm sure that some people would find that hard to stomach, huh? Guys, I know that rival characters can create conflict, but again, I wouldn't call Madoka a bad guy or anything. She's just one of those characters who just wants to come out as an idol, like full moon anyways. So you can't really say that's really a bad thing in its own right. I mean, let's be real here. This is true about a lot of stuff, not just in the idol industry, but as anything as a whole. We all want to accomplish our goals, but at the same time, we have to work our best to earn it. So I really can't say I hate Madoka in this position, because in some cases I see where she's coming from. I may not be in her position as much, but if you're in her position who wants to see what could go from there, then I think you may see Madoka in your position. Next up we have is Masami Ushige. Ushige is Full Moon's manager, and at first glance, it's basically what you expect. She may be a bit crazy at times, but honestly, she does take her job very seriously, and she is very passionate at becoming Full Moon's own manager. And honestly, it's not hard to see why that is. I hear some people who could make the argument that maybe they could have at least gave her a little more development as time goes on, but I think they already did, because she does and start off what you expect. But honestly, when you get right down to it, she does seem like she's very worthy to do what she can. And later on in the series, I didn't mention this before, but after Mitsuki actually gets her identity revealed, both her and one of the doctors, Wakaju Kichi, in the series, when it comes to the own singing management, it actually does show that they really do want her to pursue her dreams despite her illness. And while I admit that if this was the real world, they would probably say things like, oh, but you really need to take it off. You need to take it easy on yourself. You can't sing no more. In this series, I can kind of forgive it a little more because it's actually not supposed to be realistic all the way. Seriously, a lot of people seem to think that these anime are supposed to be realistic when really just watch something that does give you a realistic vibe, so there's that going for it. As for that, however, I will say that I do enjoy her character a little more than I thought I would have anyways. And let's be real here, let's not mince words. You probably wish there were more managers who, while they are pretty cheerful and have their awkward moments, she's also very grateful for what she is. She's kind of like a mother figure in some cases because, well, you probably guessed it by now. Yeah, Ski doesn't have her parents anymore. Oh god, she doesn't have a lot of notions where they always have the parents dead thing. First in America, now in Japan, and moving on. But remember how I said there's a doctor in this year series? Yeah, this year character, Waku, and she is actually one of those characters who really wants to make Ski to rest and not to want to push herself into singing, even going so far as to say this is something that he really didn't want her to do anyways. But after some persuading and later on in the series, you do get the sense of urge that he really does want her to rest, but he doesn't also want to crush her dreams out loud. Now I realize that in real form, doctors are complete sticklers like this. They'll do anything to prevent you from going out there if you want to do so already, but let's be real here. If this were in real life, I highly doubt the doctor would at least try and persuade you to go to your dreams if you want to do so already, unless you want to live your life to the fullest. While it doesn't seem like much to him, he also becomes Mitsuki's producer later on, because he really does seem to think that she has the real urgent passion to do so when it comes to her singing. Not much to say about it other than that, but can I just take this moment to say that they made the doctor too good looking in here. What? Come on now. Oh, I gotta add to. Come on. I should also point out that there are times where he does become Mitsuki. He's just talking to her anyways and hoping that she gets throat surgery done. But even with that said, however, I still think he's a pretty interesting character in his own way. Though I don't think he's the deepest or anything like that, but you get. So next up we have is Fusiki, or Mitsuki's grandmother is going to call her from that anyways. Now, I will say that for a grandmother character, she's not the badass kind of grandmother, but honestly, when it comes to her own story, why she hates music so much, let's just say that it goes a little deeper in the manga than it does in the anime. Yeah, the anime doesn't give you that much to work with beyond she just hates music so much until later on in the series we do get some indication of why she hates it. See, it turns out that her daughter and her son-in-law, both of which seem to care more about her music more than visiting the grandmother herself, and Hope does already. She really feels like this devastates her more than you may know, because as time goes on, you start to get this sudden urge that maybe there's more her than just that, especially because she feels to lose her granddaughter as well. See, this is where I feel like a lot of people may think that she comes off as a bit too strict and stubborn for her own good. But I feel like it actually gives a little more character growth as time goes on. Sometimes it really depends on what you're looking for when it comes right down to it, but I don't really think I hated the grandmother as much as I thought I would have. Up there with Madoka, I don't think she's really a character that's worth hating. She just doesn't want to lose her granddaughter, and what's more, she's all that she has left. Even though it takes her almost near the end of the series to fully realize that until then. Yeah, like I said, this year's series seems to have more jam-packed filler than you may think, so it takes a while to get used to. But I can also see why some people would give up and say it's too little too late to care about her otherwise. She's not up there with Genkai from Yu Yu Hakusho or anything, but she still manages to do pretty alright, well, what I'm trying to say. But I feel like there's someone that I'm forgetting in this year's series. Oh yeah, he's me. If you don't know who Izumi is, let's talk about him. At first glance, when you think of Uzumi, along with his little ghost friend Jonathan, this is where things start to come a little forward. Okay, so one thing you need to know about Uzumi is that, at first glance, again, up there with Madoka and the grandmother, seems like a lot of characters get misunderstood, don't they? So, take a drink, if you will. I don't really know what you guys do. Anyways, one thing I will say about Uzumi is that he's not all of what he appears to be. At first glance, he starts off what you'd expect. Very charismatic and still wants to do whatever she can to make sure that Mitsuki sets her life up to make sure that she doesn't have everything to go for her in the afterlife anytime soon. But as time goes on, I will get why some people will actually say things like, oh, he's only doing this because he wants to kill off one of the characters off. Personally, I don't really think that's what they were intended. Yeah, he does want Mitsuki to at least give him her soul. Well, anyways, yeah, I'm sorry for stumbling my words. It's hard to say his or her without fumbling the two up. Anyways, yeah, after her trying to get to her soul and everything like that, it's only up to Mariko and to Takudo to go so far as to try and stop her from doing so, and this actually haunts and meets him more than him may think. So much so that she really doesn't want to die right away, especially what's yet to come. Now, when Izumi actually does have his questionable moments, not pervert moments, just grabbing him Mitsuki by the hand and everything, you would think that this would mean that he's just doing this to desperate terms. Honestly, I don't think that is the case. Yeah, he does seem like he wants to do whatever he can in order to get at Mitsuki's own soul and everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's only doing this because why not? He's just trying to do his job as a Shinigami, and therefore he just wants to do what's best. Same could be said with the other Shinigami, but except unlike Mariko and Takudo, who seem to be more like, say, they're not as well Shinigami and professional like Izumi is, you get the sense of urge that Izumi's just doing everything he can. But as for Jonathan, I can't really say there's much to him, aside from he does look kind of creepy from his own face or anything like that. But I don't want to say that's really what he has anyways, because get this, whenever Shinigami do get their memories, or some combination of whenever they do seem like they're remembering something, this is where things get a little topsy-turvy quickly, because guess what, it turns out that they can turn into ghosts and lose their wings. Yeah, I'm not so sure how that works, but in Japan standards, I guess that's how they explain it, or maybe they can do whatever they want in their own fantasy. I wouldn't know, but you can take your pick if you want to. I realize that this video is probably getting longer and longer every time I do so, But let's talk about Uzi. Instead of Uzumi's all this way, let's talk about a character that I personally felt like it was coming. And that's the character Ichikun. Oh boy. Maybe I'm gonna sound cold when I say how I felt about this twist, but you're gonna have to bear with what I have in store. So, spoilers ahead if you do care about this series. I wouldn't know, but let's move on. So, let's talk about Ichikun for just a quick second. And I know some people are gonna think I'm cold-hearted when I say about this twist, but really, I think it's predictable all along. So, let's talk about what happened. So, remember when I said that Mitsuki made a promise that she would meet up with Ichikun later on? Well, apparently I meant in the second season. Yeah, apparently after giving a tour to Medica, even though Mitsuki's grandmother forbade her not to go there, it's here where we see that Mitsuki actually wants to meet up with Ichikun in person. This doesn't only upset the grandmother, but as well as Takudo, because, well, remember, he likes Mitsuki all the way through, so take your bet. And from there on, you can definitely paint the picture as time goes on. Connect the dots, and yeah. As time goes on, you start to realize, why hasn't Ichikun called back or written in any letters or anything like that? Well, as it turns out, after they hit America, it's here where we see that the entire reveal is that they were going to the cabin so they can hang out there, thereby proving that they're going someplace that's pretty cold, but I don't know where this place is located. They don't really tell you much except where it looks like it could be. I'm getting flashbacks to antisocial climbers is what I'm saying. Anyways, yeah, apparently after all of that build-up, we finally get to see that Ichikun's grandparents are there, and you guessed it, they're still mourning over the loss of some people. And Takudo and Maruko, while they try their best to get Mitsuki to turn around, especially when jacking up the car a bit, Mitsuki decides to march up to herself and realizes something that she wasn't expecting. And I think you guys already know what I'm about to say, but let's pretend we don't. If you guess that Ichikun passed away 2 years prior from the series, guess what? You got your extra bonus cookie points. Yeah, apparently Ichikun passed away in 2 years prior from the series, except they said it was a car crash. In the manga, they said it was a plane crash, but I'm just gonna say that both him and his parents died in a crash, so you be the judge of that one. And, well, I'm probably gonna get some flack for saying this, but it needs. Now, I realize that some people are probably going to call me cold-hearted after this episode, even though I can be like that at times, but I'm going to sound like the hero of tomorrow for a second. I mean, sure, my favorite writer and reviewer and anything, but it needs to be said. This was kind of predictable all along. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with building this up, if anything to judge by, but I'm not gonna lie, this entire reveal felt predictable if you're an adult. Now, I realize that when kids watch this, they're not gonna think too much of it because, well, let's be honest here, this series came out in the early to mid-2000s. It was during the time when we still had a lot to experience with the deaths and everything like that. And before you think about it for even a second or two, I realize what you're gonna say. Flammy, you have to understand, this was the build-up, pay-up all along. As a kids, we didn't know this was going to happen. And to that I say, that's true. As kids, we never understood what was going to happen and such like that. But here as an adult, I feel like it was kind of predictable all along. We already knew that Ichikun was probably going to be dead all along, or at least I thought that so. And even worse than that, they basically just randomly put that in there so they can at least give the whole build-up. And I'm not gonna lie, not only did this really felt like it was really sad for some people, and while I do find it predictable, this is where Mitsuki starts breaking down. He starts talking less, she doesn't care if her throat cancer gets worse, and as the list goes on, she doesn't care what happens to her anymore. So much so that even the Shinigami do everything they can to snap her out of it. And I gotta say, I will admit that this goes on for a few episodes. Around 3 or 4 if my memory serves correctly. Yeah, they do stuff spending in this here time being, but I'm just here saying that I get that it takes a while to go get over this and everything like that, but maybe I'm thinking too much of it. So I thought at first maybe there was something that they could have done, like say if you don't snap out of it, things will get worse from there. But no, they don't even do that. They just do whatever they can to cheer her up. And this just goes without saying that Mitsuki just wants to prevent herself from singing. For the love of God. I realize that she's going through a lot and everything like this, and I feel pretty bad for her harping on this or anything like that. But it really goes without saying that it just feels like they're only doing this so they can have some sad pathos by the end of the day. And that's really what it has to consider. But I don't want to bitch about this too much, so let's talk about the animation for a second. Animation wise for 2000s era, it's alright. I'm not gonna say it's bad or anything, but the water effects are obvious whenever the Shinigami phase through walls and ceilings and such, so that's Studio Dean for you. I wouldn't call it the worst out there, even if they do go off model from time to time. Not as much as, say, Studio Pierrot's off model, so thankfully not that much, but I'm not gonna lie, the animation itself, while there are types of fashion I do like here and there. As for typical character designs, it's basically as what you expect for a classic shoujo series. Not awful, but definitely not the best either. It's alright, to say the least. And honestly, this is an action series, so there's that going for it. But speaking of which, though, since this is a music series, I think I might as well fess up how I felt about these two in detail, so hopefully this won't drag on too long, so let's get on to that. While I do enjoy music, and that's usually what gets me to watch the series sometimes, I think I was more invested in seeing where the story takes me from there. And, well, let's get this out of the way. The music box you're seeing on screen, as much as I hate to say it was all water effects as well, not gonna lie, I would love a music box, but to address the elephant in the room, it's pretty expensive. Thousands upon thousands of dollars just to pay for a music box like this. I mean, say what you want about a necklace. At least I don't think they put it as much, but still. But the music itself, that's why this music box, because this wasn't really just Mitsuki's music box. It was really really her parents' music box before they died. But even with that said, however, the music box itself looks pretty cool, even if it reminds me of one of my Dora the Explorer toys I had with the same detail to it. I don't know if I can show it from Google because they're not going to understand what I'm saying. They still wouldn't do the same thing for me otherwise, but you get my point. But yeah, this music box, it's pretty cool and all, but I must address the music for a sec. Now, for an Idol series, I'm surprised that Studio Dean actually managed to make 2 different endings and 4 different endings. Yeah, for some reason they had more to that than the music itself. For an Idol series, that's kind of low. Say what you want about something like Mermaid Melody, but at least they actually had a variety of songs, even if they play the few songs over and over again. And I can at least excuse that, because despite how long it took me to watch that series, I think they actually had a majority of songs to play through it, and you can still skip over them if you don't want to hear the songs anymore. But I'm not saying I don't like Eternal Snow, but what I am saying is that they play this song so many times. From the constant reminder that Full Moon, Mitsuki's alter ego, is her own image song, to the point where they had to sing it in this here series over and over again as well. Yeah, it gets really old after a while, and I'm pretty sure that some people probably thought that otherwise. Now, granted, I do enjoy Full Moon, who's music, Eternal Snow. It was actually sung by a real pop idol, but even with that said, I feel pretty bad that this actually is the only song we hear most of the time in the series. There are other times where they'll sing a different version of it, or sometimes sing the end credits songs in the concerts or anything like that, but personally I find it kind of lazy that they didn't do much with that. Maybe that was all there was that they could only afford, or maybe that was all there was for the manga, but either way, I still feel like that's pretty cheap by all things considered. But I'm not gonna bitch about Studio Dean this much because, well, I don't know how far they've come since then, because I'm focusing on other studios as well. But I'm just saying, I think they could have provided more than just one song if they could afford the opening and ending themes. So there's that going. But I don't want to drag this video too long because for the time this video comes out, it'll probably be like what, like 45, 46 minutes by this year's video's over. So let's talk about something you're probably asking yourself. Would I cover anything from Arina Tanemura? After all, there's a lot of works that seem to be said, and what's more, I haven't went through them all as time goes on. Actually, no, I wouldn't say that. I'm not saying I don't like Arina Tanemura's works, but the original idea I was going to have for a work to talk about would have to be from the series The Gentleman Alliance's Cross. Now, the reason why I say I can't cover this year's series is not because I find it bad or anything, but it's not because it's not a magical girl show, but it's also because, get this, there is no adaptation of it, at least not yet. By the time this video comes out, there has been no signs of having this adapted, and what's more, a lot of Arina Tanemura's one-shots have all been in either just a few minute OVAs, or worse yet, they just never got adapted. So either way, I couldn't really tell you much about it, and I couldn't get the reading on time, which is a shame because I feel like despite that, however, Arina Tanemura seems to know where her niche is, even if it takes her a while to do it. But that doesn't mean I want to leave off you guys on a dour note. But even with that said, you might be asking yourself the big question. Which of these series do I prefer more? After all, Phantom Thief Sheen and Full Moon are the only series I've covered so far, so which one do I prefer? Honestly, I think you know my answer, but I need to at least explain something here. Honestly, it's hard to choose at this point. I didn't hate Phantom Thief Sheen like some other people thought it was the worst anime or magical girl show out there. It does have its problems, don't get me wrong. The whole thing about Finn being the bad guy and how things don't get serious until much later on did seem like it was kind of a downgrade to me, but honestly, that's what you expect when it comes to something like a series of magical girl. However, Arina Tanemura did try to do whatever she could to get her own adaptation, and I think Toei did whatever they could out of. Doesn't mean we can't ask for a remake, but you already know how I felt about that in my last video. Shoujo doesn't really seem to get as much recognition as much as it has. But despite that, however, I still think Full Moon in of itself does seem like it has potential to have a actually give audiences another fair shot. I mean, I wouldn't call it the worst magical girl show out there, but it's far from being the best one out there in my opinion. But even with that said, I still enjoy it despite its flaws, even if it could have been a little better. As for Full Moon Sagashite, while I wouldn't say it's really a series that followed its adaptation as pretty well, I feel like it's really best to say that they did whatever they could out of it. And when I say that they had a little more backstory to someone like Takudo, they actually did say that there were times where it felt like, will we ever see each other again? Oh my god. I'm getting deja vu to another thing. I call it All Dogs Go to Heaven, where they actually say that. Goes to show you how sentimental that can be. I'm not saying that Full Moon Sagashite is as flawed as the other series was, but it does feel like it was trying to be all bittersweet. Trying to say that you should live life to the fullest, not be afraid to pursue your dreams, and while there are some heavy moments here and there, I did state how I felt about when things were mature in my other series, so you can pretty much watch that at your own leisure. However, I feel kind of bad that it feels like I've been torturing myself to say what I felt about this year's series entirely, despite how long this video is. Yeah, this may be the longest Magical Girl podcast episode I've ever come across to watching myself, but I'm just gonna say this right here and now. I had a lot to say about Full Moon, and while it wasn't really anything I called bad, some of the stuff could use a little work on itself. However, I don't think Arina Tanemura is one of those creators that we should really overlook anyways, because I do feel pretty bad for her. I don't really know if it's just me or not, but people like Ayasawa or some other mangaka like Naoki Yarasawa have works that actually do manage to get themselves adaptations that's got far more recognition than you realize. And I'm not entirely faulting creators who really want to get their works out there that almost never do, or something like that. After all, some works happen to be adapted and others don't. Honestly, Full Moon itself, and as well as Phantom Thief Sheen, probably came out at the worst time. Like I said, Full Moon itself did get an English dub, but only partially. And honestly, I'm kind of sad that it never got a full English dub because, well, it seems like every Magical Girl show I've talked about so far lately almost never get English dubs anyways. Maybe because they don't sell as well here where I'm from, or maybe it's because as they thought that, hey, no one cares about it. But that's kind of the thing I feel bad about. And that's what I feel about Full Moon of itself. It didn't seem like it get as much recognition as some people thought it would have, and I feel pretty bad it almost never did. Would that mean that I'm giving up on Arina Tanemura's works? No. I wouldn't say she's the worst out there, but she's nowhere near the best out there. I can fully state that there are going to be tons of mangaka who will say that. But if you want my honest opinion, while I do really think that Phantom Thief Sheen and Full Moon are good in their own ways, they could still have their own fans. Seriously, the debate itself actually done so already. I do apologize if this video took a lot longer than it did, and in doing so, it also took me a long time to watch the show. But if you already heard me from the beginning what happened, then you already know how that is. I'm sorry if I didn't get to do videos as much as I wanted to, but that's what happens when you have a tight schedule. Hopefully next time when we do talk about a video on Magical Girl, well, I'm going to talk about another Magical Girl show sometime in April. There's something about the genre that made me realize that there's something that's been bothering me for quite some time now. But I'll tell you what it is next time. So I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. And as always, stay flamingo-tastic. I'll see you all around.